At one of the finest restaurants in the city, I accidentally caught the hem of my son's girlfriend's dress under my foot. She whipped around and screamed, "Watch where you're walking, old man. People like you shouldn't even be in here." Then grabbed my collar and ripped my shirt open for the whole room to see. People around us went silent, phones already raised. Then the restaurant manager appeared, leaned close, and spoke 6 quiet words that drained the color from both their faces. Note some elements of this story are fictional, included to bring the message to life more fully. Names and locations are coincidental. The truth underneath them is not. There's a habit I keep that nobody at Crenshaw & Co. fully understands, not even Leonard, though he's worked alongside me long enough that he stopped asking questions about it some time ago. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here. If these stories speak to you, stay close and follow along, because there are more where this one came from. Before we go any further, I'd love to know, is this your first time sitting down with one of my stories, or have you been here a while? Let me know in the comments. One more thing worth saying, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the meaning inside the story that I hope stays with you. Once a month, sometimes twice. If something pulls at me, I make the drive down from River Oaks without warning, no call ahead, no announcement. Out front, I pull into the reserved space, the one stenciled management only in small white letters along the curb. Then I go in through the main entrance, same as any stranger off the street. No jacket, no tie, nobody behind me, carrying a phone and a calendar. What I have on tonight is the gray flannel shirt with the navy check pattern, a pair of khaki trousers, and the brown leather Oxfords I picked up 11 years ago from a shop on Post Oak Boulevard that shuttered long since. The right heel is worn down to almost nothing. I keep telling myself I'll get them resoled. It hasn't happened yet. Iris had a saying that what a man puts on his back when nobody's looking is the truest thing about him. 12 of these flannel shirts. That's what she gave me the winter before the diagnosis. One for every month, she told me, smiling as she said it, so you will always have a clean one. She folded each one herself, crease-precise sleeves tucked in. 4 remain. The elevator lets me out on the 3rd floor at 7:32. The first thing that reaches me, as it always does, is the light. I designed that lighting myself, spent nearly 4 months going back and forth with an architect from Sugarland before we landed on the final scheme. The chandeliers above the main dining room are set to 55% brightness during the dinner service. Warm amber, not white. Dim enough that a woman looks lovely across the table, bright enough that a man doesn't have to squint at his bill. Down the hallway along the window wall, the floor glows strips of soft gold tucked along the baseboard, running the full length. The bar at the far end runs on its own system, cooler and sharper, the kind of illumination that makes bourbon in a glass look like it deserves to be studied. Everything tonight is where it belongs. Nadia has the section by the entrance. Those 4 tops I always seat first, because they're what you see the moment you step off the elevator. She's 24, 3rd year at University of Houston, pre-law, 3 dinner shifts a week, because the scholarship money doesn't cover everything. I didn't learn that from her. Leonard told me offhand in that way of his, passing along what he thinks I ought to know, without it sounding like a briefing. She works those tables like the room is a current she already knows how to move through. Water glasses topped before they reach the halfway mark, bread arriving at precisely the moment a table loosens up and starts to breathe. She doesn't spot me when I come off the elevator. She's already in motion. I take up my usual position beside the column left of the entrance, the one with that small bronze plaque no one ever stops to read, and pull the folded notepad from my front pocket. Tonight's list has 7 items. One of them has been bothering me for weeks. A slight delay in the timing between the appetizer course and the main, sometimes as much as 14 minutes when the kitchen is running at full capacity. Ignacio and I went over it last week. His read is that the hotline is short-staffed. Mine is that the handoff between the front of house and the expediting station breaks down under pressure. Probably we're each half right. Over at the corner table by the window, a man is seated alone, bourbon in front of him, a small notebook open beside it. 40 or thereabouts. Navy blazer, white shirt, nothing at the collar. The studied informality of a man who works at looking like he isn't working. I know the species. Critics, essayists, the ones whose trade is sitting still in a room and catching everything everyone else lets slide. When Leonard flagged a reservation 2 weeks back, Hester Calvin party of 1, I'd pulled the name up that same night. food and culture correspondent for the Houston Chronicle. His last review had run to 3,500 words and included 3 paragraphs about the acoustics of the dining room. A man who hears the room, not just the food. I write myself a note. Bar side lighting, check the angle on the third fixture from the left. Then the notepad goes back in my pocket and I go back to watching. At 7:41, Leonard comes out of the back office. The dark navy suit he saves for Friday evenings. His bearing is what it always is, unhurried, level. The walk of a man who has decided that haste is a form of admission. He clocks me from across the room. One nod. That's all. That is the entire agreement between us. When I'm here like this, I'm not the name on the lease. I'm not the man whose signature sits in the deed records at the Houston County Recorder's office. I'm a man by a column with a notepad and nothing else. Leonard has held that understanding for 12 years, going back to before any of this existed, back to the early days when Crenshaw & Co. was still an idea I was trying to build into something solid. He has never once let it slip. I turn toward the tall windows at the dining room's far end. On a clear night from up here, Westheimer Road unspools westward toward Sugarland, the hills beyond catching a faint luminous haze. Iris loved looking at it. We stood at these very windows the evening before. Opening night, the crew gone, the furniture in, but the place not yet alive, and she flattened her palm against the glass and said, "It looks like the city is breathing." I told her that was the most romantic thing she had ever said about a piece of commercial real estate. She laughed and told me to hush. That was the winter of 2015. By the spring of 2017, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer doesn't negotiate once it gets moving. The doctors said 8 months. They missed it by 3. That gap felt like a gift. It also felt like nothing whatsoever. I still end up at these windows. Not every time, not on purpose, but something pulls me here, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. There are things about Crenshaw & Co. that only Leonard and I and Ignacio know, along with the few who were present at the start. When I first took the lease on this floor, the 3rd floor of what they were still calling the Corsair building, a real estate outfit downstairs, had been using it as a dumping ground for excess inventory. Drop ceilings, fluorescent tubes, carpet that had gone the color of old mustard. I came through with an architect named Celeste Navarro on a Tuesday morning in October of 2014. She walked to the center of the main room, turned slowly in a full circle, and said, "I can see it if you can." I could see it. 14 months followed, 4 contractors, 1 complete teardown and rebuild of the kitchen infrastructure. Then we opened. Iris came to the site every Saturday through all of it, wearing the same canvas sneakers each time paint marked from some project at home she'd started and set aside. She'd move through each section and tell me what she felt there. This corner feels closed in. This wall needs to breathe. The light above the bar is doing something interesting. Keep it. No formal training, none at all. What she had was the rarer thing, a precise instinct for how a space lands on the people inside it. The night we opened, we served 71 covers. Ignacio burned the first 2 orders of the halibut and sent them back himself before they left the kitchen. Leonard seated a party of 8 at a table designed for 6 and managed it so smoothly that they left a 40% tip and asked specifically for him on their next reservation. For 3 hours I stood at the back of the room and watched the place we had built come into itself. Iris had on a blue dress. She was at the corner table near the window, the same seat where Calvin Hester would be sitting 9 years on with his bourbon and his open notebook. She had 1 glass of champagne, then moved to sparkling water because she said she wanted to hold the evening clearly in her mind. I returned to that sometimes, the deliberateness of it. The way she already sensed even then that some nights are singular and that the only right response is to stay fully awake inside them. Leonard came on board in 2012, years before the restaurant was ever a thought, back when the whole operation was property management run out of a 2-room office in Bel Air with 4 people on staff. He'd left a Dallas hospitality group that was in the middle of a restructuring. 12 years in operations was what he carried with him, along with something harder to name a way of crossing a room that told you everything. No urgency, nothing wasted the undivided focus of a man who gives one task his full attention before he moves to the next. I'd seen that quality in maybe a handful of people in my life. I knew what it meant when I saw it. I extended the offer of general manager on our 3rd sit-down. His one condition, the freedom to tell me plainly when he believed I had it wrong. I said that was the same condition I'd have put forward. In 12 years, he has pushed back on me 17 times by my count. 14 of those he was right. 15, I should say. The remaining two are still open for argument. I'm at the window watching Westheimer Road, the traffic 7 floors down, moving the way it always moves, at this hour slowly without purpose. The elevator chimes behind me. I hear them before I've turned. The particular sound of two people who've already claimed a room before they've set foot inside it. I turned around. Off the elevator stepped a young man in a black suit, tailored well enough to clear the bar, not well enough to feel like his own. The shoes beneath it had been buffed to the kind of high gloss that announces itself the sort of shine a man applies when the shoes are the point. At his side, the woman wore a floor-length gown, dark fabric with a train, the whole effect expensive, carefully constructed. The clutch beneath her arm, the way she carried herself. There was nothing casual about any of it. She moved like someone who had worked out exactly how that dress moved before tonight. 11 weeks without a call from my son. The last time I'd been face-to-face with Aaron was 4 months back, a steakhouse in Bel Air. His suggestion lunch that turned into 40 minutes of explanation for why he was short $2,000 and why it was only a temporary cash flow issue. I covered it. I always covered it. I'd understood for a long time that this was the root of the problem. Known it for years. Written it off anyway. He hadn't spotted me. His attention was on the room, a sweep of the tables, methodical reading, who was there who might register his arrival. His eyes moved across me without pausing. I was furniture. A shadowed stretch of the entryway where I had been standing, the light falling behind me instead of across my face. Flannel shirt, worn Oxfords, 60 years old, and nothing about me that demanded a second look. Aaron hadn't stepped inside this restaurant in the 3 years it had been open, so he had no frame for the man leaning near the column, no way to match that face to the father he'd last shared a booth with in Bel Air. I hadn't always been invisible to him. Between the ages of 7 and 14, Aaron and I had the kind of closeness that doesn't require tending the years when a son takes it on faith that his father has the answers and the father hasn't yet had to prove he doesn't. Summer weekends at Shea Stadium for Mets, games the two of us riding the 7 train out of Flushing hot dogs foil wrapped because Iris didn't trust anything sold at a ballpark. Aaron kept score in a small notebook back pocket, his own personal shorthand, a private set of symbols for every at-bat that I never did manage to decode. One of those notebooks is in a box on the 2nd floor of the River Oaks house in the storage room, with everything else I've held on to and can't bring myself to open. The gap between us didn't open all at once. It never does. It built from smaller things, decisions that looked minor from close range and only showed their full weight from a distance. High school was when I was least present. I told myself I'd make it up. Parents always tell themselves that. Iris picked up what I put down. She filled whatever space I'd left behind, made herself so constant in those years that my absence quietly became the baseline he grew up against. When her diagnosis came, I returned. Every day for those 14 months through to the end. I think Aaron took note of that. I think it landed. But the distance had already become habit, and what gets wired in during adolescence doesn't loosen easily. When Iris passed, Aaron was 23, subletting a place in Astoria, with 2 roommates picking up shifts at a bar in Midtown Houston, no clear destination yet. I relocated to Houston, 18 months on following a property deal that multiplied into 3 more, and eventually into the whole of what I have now. I put the offer to Aaron come out. He said New York still had something he hadn't finished with. He stayed 2 more years. Then he came to Houston anyway. Not on my account, I don't think, but because Houston draws the people, New York hasn't satisfied yet. Dinners 4 or 5 times a year. Phone calls that ran about 12 minutes because that's how long the surface takes to cover fine, busy, nothing major, and neither of us had built the habit of going underneath it. That had always been Iris's territory. She had a gift for the question that opened a conversation rather than closed it. We'd both lost that when we lost her. There I was in the entryway of Crenshaw & Co., watching Aaron work the room with his eyes before he'd even reached the host stand, measuring it, finding the right tables to be seen at. I found myself thinking about that scoring notebook, whether he still had the one he'd kept. It had genuinely never crossed my mind to ask him. He moved in my direction, not toward me, toward the host stand, which happened to share the same line of sight. He pulled up 2 feet away, looked straight at me. "Hey, yeah, you're blocking the entrance. Move it. We have a reservation." Something went tight in my chest, fast and sharp. I held my expression where it was. "What, you don't understand English?" He raised his voice just enough for the room to catch it. The 2 tables nearest us fell quiet. "Move," I said. "You're in the way." The woman beside him, Tessa, I'd learn that later, let her gaze drop to my shoes, come back up to my shirt, drift down again. She tilted toward Aaron and said it at a volume meant for me. They really let anyone in off the street these days. The two of them shared a laugh over it, easy, unhurried, the laugh of people who've been speaking the same private language long enough that the punchlines write themselves. I moved aside, said nothing. Both hands stayed at my sides, and I kept deliberate track of them because they had their own ideas. Aaron tugged his jacket straight, glanced at the watch on his wrist, one of those reflexive touches a man makes without registering that he's making it, and walked Tessa toward the host stand. I held my ground and watched his back until he was across the room. When Aaron was 9, there was a habit he had. Evenings I came home late from a job site, he'd be at the front window of our apartment in Queens, face against the glass, breath clouding it. Iris would tell him it was time for bed. 5 more minutes, Mama, 5 more minutes. She came back to that story often over the years. It would come to me on long drives, that image of his face in the window. I took the notepad out of my pocket and wrote one line under the 7 items already on the page. Then I put it away and settled in. Tonight was going to unfold one way or another. I had no interest in missing it. 30 years of stepping out of this boy's path. That had run its course. Standing in my worn Oxfords on the floor of a restaurant whose deed bore my name, I knew with some certainty that nothing would shift if I kept absorbing the damage on his behalf. The elevator opened once more behind me. A pair of guests came through, took in the room, drifted toward the bar. By the window across the dining room, Aaron held Tessa's chair out for her at the VIP table. He said something that drew a laugh out of her. Then he sat down and lifted the wine list in both hands, the posture of a man performing expertise he may or may not have possessed. He had no real sense of where he was. I crossed to the far end of the room and kept my back to their table, not because watching was unbearable, because I needed to observe without being observed doing it. Nadia was the one who went to take their order. I watched her approach the VIP table, notepad, ready, shoulders square, the practiced smile she reserves for parties that make their presence known before they've settled into their seats. Aaron didn't glance up when she arrived. He was still working the wine list, one finger tracing down the page, staging the performance of a difficult decision. "We'll do the Opus 1, he said, eyes still down. The 2017. Nadia's pen moved. Excellent choice. And for dinner, 2 Wagyu ribeyes. He shut the menu at last and passed it to her, the way a man passes something off to someone whose entire function is to receive it. Tell the kitchen not to rush it. I want it done right. Tessa was photographing the table, the candle holder, the bread basket, the city through the glass. She angled the phone toward Aaron, and he adjusted without thinking, chin rising, the automatic ease of someone who has long since learned his best angles. The Opus 1 2017 is $420 a bottle. The 2 Wagyu ribeyes with sides come out to $380 between them. Standing across the room, I could already calculate that the bill would settle somewhere close to $900. I also knew from the Venmo records I had quietly stopped pretending I wasn't checking that Aaron's credit card had a remaining limit of just over $100. Enough. Tonight would be enough. I moved slowly down the window corridor, checking the baseboard lighting, jotting a note about the fixture near the bar. Routine business, the sort of thing I had come in to do. At 8:13, I watched Tessa excuse herself from the table. She started toward the restrooms at the back, but stopped short of the door, pressing herself against the wall beside the coat check, and pulled out her phone. I was near enough to read her face when the call picked up. Whatever answer she needed, it wasn't the one she got. Her jaw set. She said something brief and clipped into the phone, listened, said something briefer. Still, she ended the call and stayed there a moment, phone flat against her collarbone. Eyes shut, lips moving faintly like a person running numbers in their head. I'd learned the details from Nadia afterward. The gown Tessa had on long dark fabric, the train sweeping behind her across the floor, wasn't hers. She'd rented it from Maison Leia in Montrose. The rental fee was $4,100. She had put down $500 as a deposit. The outstanding balance was due before 10 news and rollers that same evening, and she'd called to ask for more time. The boutique had said no. If the dress came back damaged, she'd be on the hook for the full replacement cost, $4,200. From what I pieced together later, Tessa Drumfield didn't have $4,200. She was carrying $42,000 in credit card debt and an agency contract that had been canceled the week before. She returned to the table, composed, smiled at whatever Aaron said, lifted her wine glass. From across the room, Nadia caught my eye for just a beat, not knowing who I was, only registering that I'd been standing in one spot long enough to notice things, then turned back to her section. I checked my watch. 8:17, 3 items still left on the list. Kitchen timing, the expediting station, the lighting near the bar. I started moving. The window-side corridor runs about 40 feet from the entrance to the far wall. I walk it the same way every time, slowly pausing at each fixture to check the angle and the bulb temperature. The third fixture from the left was off by about 12 degrees, its beam dropping toward the floor rather than falling across the table beside it. I made a note, small things, nothing a diner consciously registers, but the room feels it a faint dimness, an unease they couldn't name if asked. I was nearing the end of the corridor close to the VIP section when Tessa rose from her chair. She did it carefully, managing the length of the train, gathering the fabric at her hip, then stepped away from the table and toward the window. She wanted a photograph. The westward view from that particular spot, Westheimer Road dropping away into the October dark, the city lights just beginning to sharpen, is genuinely something. I'd chosen that window placement myself. The train fanned out behind her across the floor, dark fabric against the warm amber of the baseboard light. She raised her phone, found her angle, stepped back to pull more of the view into the frame. I didn't see it in time. My right foot came down on the edge of the train. Not with any force, not with any intention. The way a foot lands when a man is reading his notepad while he walks covering ground, he has covered 100 times without once needing to look at the floor. I felt the resistance under my heel, heard the fabric go taut. Tessa gasped a short, sharp sound and spun around. The dress hadn't torn. The seam along the back panel had pulled visibly, the stitching straining at the point where the train joined the skirt. It needed to be looked at. It might be repairable, but Tessa Drumfield, standing there with her phone still raised and the color gone from her face, was not thinking about whether it was repairable. She was thinking about $4, $200. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately. "That was entirely my fault. If there's any damage, I'll take full responsibility." Her mouth opened. For a moment, nothing came out. Then, everything did. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice cracked across the dining room like something slammed against a hard surface. Every conversation within 30 feet stopped. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Ma'am, I understand you're upset. Please let me—" "Sir, this dress costs more than you probably make in a year." She was shaking one hand, gripping the fabric at her hip, knuckles pale. "Do you even know what you're standing in right now? Do you have any idea where you are?" Nadia came around the corner from the next section, moving fast, voice quiet and level. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. If we can step over here, we can look at the damage together and work out. En boerbestaat, one dig is explainable." "Get out of my way." Tessa's elbow caught Nadia's arm, as she turned, not exactly a shove, but it was in that territory. Nadia stepped back, jaw tight, and met my eyes for a moment, with an expression I recognized, the look of someone absorbing something unjust and choosing not to feed it. I looked past both of them toward the VIP table. Aaron was exactly where I'd left him in my mind, upright, wine glass in hand, watching. His eyes met mine for just a second, and I caught the precise moment he almost stood. The small shift in his posture, weight moving forward, loading onto his feet, and then it settled back. He reached for his glass. He looked away. That was the moment, not anything that came after. That moment, my son choosing the glass, was the one I would carry long after the rest of the evening was gone. Tessa was still going. Her voice had climbed another register. I kept my eyes on her and worked to think clearly. She came 2 steps toward me, and I didn't move back. "Do you know who we are?" Her tone had dropped from fury into something flatter and colder, which landed harder. "My boyfriend owns this building, this entire building, and you are standing here in your little thrift store outfit, putting your hands on my property." "I didn't put my hands on anything," I said. "My foot caught the hem of your dress while I was walking. I've already offered to take responsibility for any damage." "Oh, you'll take responsibility." A short, ugly laugh. "What does that look like exactly? Are you going to write me a check? What does that even look like from you?" I didn't answer that. She reached out and took hold of the front of my shirt in both hands. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I have gone back over it many times, and I think precision matters here. She did not push me. She did not strike me. She gripped the collar and the placket of my flannel shirt in both fists, and she pulled sharply with the full weight of her frustration and her fear driving it, and the fabric gave. The sound of it, cotton tearing along the buttonhole seam, was not loud. But the room had gone completely quiet, and it didn't need to be. Buttons scattered across the marble floor. 3 separate sounds. The music had cut out sometime in the last 30 seconds, and I was only registering that now. I stood there with my shirt hanging open and didn't move. Tessa stepped back, breathing hard, still clutching a fistful of torn cotton. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright, and I could see the precise instant she understood what she'd done. Not regret, not yet. More a recalibration, a rapid reassessment of exactly where things had arrived. Nadia made a sound somewhere off to my left. Small, involuntary, like something giving way. I didn't look at her. I looked at my son. Aaron had put down his wine glass. Both palms were flat on the tablecloth in front of him. His face had gone the color of old chalk. He was staring at the linen, and his jaw moved the way a jaw moves when a man is quietly deciding what kind of person he's going to be in a moment that won't come twice. He decided. He picked up the wine glass. One sip, set it back down. 30 years of choices had built toward this one, and this one was the most legible of all. And I felt something go quiet inside me that had been making noise for a very long time. Not peace, not forgiveness. Something closer to what happens when a fever finally breaks, not pleasant, not without pain, but settled, done. At the corner table near the window, Calvin Hester had stopped writing in his notebook. His phone was face up on the table, and the small red indicator light was on. Nadia had gone completely still. I caught this in the peripheral way you catch things when your real attention is elsewhere. She had been at the service station to my left when Tessa grabbed my shirt. She'd taken one step forward and then stopped. She stood there holding a folded napkin in both hands, her face doing something complicated that I didn't have the bandwidth to read in that moment. Later, when I turned it over, I knew what I'd been looking at. Nadia was 24 years old doing a service job, and she had just watched a customer do something to her employer, not knowing I was her employer, that every person who has ever worked a service job understands somewhere below the level of thought. That particular helplessness of seeing something wrong in a room where your role requires composure and your instincts require something else entirely. She had already made one attempt. She had stepped in when Tessa's voice first hit its peak, said, "Ma'am," in the quiet, steady tone that training produces for exactly these moments, and had been pushed aside with the casual ease of someone brushing away something minor. She had found her footing again, straightened and held her position at the edge of the section, close enough to move if an opening came far enough back, not to push a situation that had already traveled well past easy recovery. The couple at the nearest table, I'd clocked them earlier, early 40s, the small wrapped box beside the woman's water glass, suggesting a wedding anniversary dinner, had eased their chairs back slightly, not to get up, just to preserve the option of getting up, which is what people do in public rooms when something violates the unspoken agreement everyone has implicitly made by being there, and they haven't yet determined whether violation demands action or only witness. The man 2 tables over in a gray suit had his phone in his hand, not visibly recording, or at least not openly, holding it the way people hold phones when they are weighing whether to start. A table of 4 near the bar looked like a business dinner. 1 woman, 3 men in varying grades of corporate casual had gone completely silent. One of the men had his fork arrested halfway between his plate and his mouth. It stayed there, suspended, forgotten, for what I'd estimate was close to 45 seconds. This was what I had built. This room, these tables, this light. These people who had come on a Friday evening expecting a particular kind of evening, the quiet luxury of a carefully made meal in a space put together with intention. The specific pleasure of being somewhere that someone genuinely cared about. They had not come for this. And yet here we were. I had spent 30 years building things, buildings, businesses, systems, structures. I had always held to the belief that what a man builds reflects who he is, that the quality of a thing is a form of autobiography. Standing in the room that bore my name on the deed with my shirt hanging open, I found myself asking what this moment said about me, what I had succeeded in building here, and what I had never managed to build somewhere else. The answer was sitting at the VIP table with a wine glass in his hand. I became aware that something close to half the dining room had their eyes on me. Several phones were out. A woman at the table nearest to us had her palm pressed over her mouth. The man in the gray suit had pushed his chair back as though he were about to rise and then hadn't. I straightened my back. I looked at Tessa. Her hand was still shaking. "Are you finished?" I asked. She opened her mouth. Before she could speak, I heard footsteps from the back office corridor. Fast, deliberate, unmistakable. Leonard had heard enough. Leonard Achebe does not hurry. In 12 years, I have never seen him hurry. He moves at the pace of someone who has long since decided that urgency signals weakness, and that the most effective way to project authority is to make authority look like it requires no effort at all. He came through the service door at the rear of the dining room and crossed the floor at exactly that pace, and the room gave way for him without any request on his part. He was wearing the dark navy suit he saves for Friday evenings, and his expression had that particular quality it takes on when he has already read the situation, already chosen his course, and is now simply moving along it. He stopped 2 feet from where I was standing and looked at me directly. "Mr. Crenshaw," he said. "Sir, are you all right?" The room shifted. I watched it happen the way you watch a weather front move through not one clean dramatic moment, but a collective simultaneous adjustment. Heads turning, eyes going back and forth between Leonard and me, then back again. The quiet revision of assumptions. Aaron pushed back his chair and stood up. His voice came out louder than he'd meant it to. "Who are you?" He pointed at Leonard, then at me. "And why are you calling him Mr. Crenshaw? That's my last name. This man is nobody. I don't know what he told you, but he came in off the street and destroyed my girlfriend's dress, and I want him removed right now." Leonard looked at Aaron for a long moment, the kind of look that holds a great deal and gives away nothing. Then he turned and walked back toward the office without a word. Aaron made a sound of disbelief. "Seriously, I'm talking to you." "Hey, I'm talking to you." Tessa put her hand on Aaron's arm. Something had shifted in her since the last 30 seconds. Leonard's manner had landed on her differently than Aaron's bluster had on anyone else. I could see her recalibrating her eyes, moving out around the room, reading the faces that were watching them. "Aaron," she said quietly. "Aaron, wait." He shook her off. He turned to the couple at the nearest table, the two who had been watching with the careful stillness of people trying very hard not to appear to be watching. "This guy walked in off the street," Aaron told them, gesturing toward me. "He's nobody. My family owns this building. My father built this place." He stopped. Something in that last sentence caught up with him. His voice shifted slightly on what came next. "This is a misunderstanding. That's all this is," I said. "Nothing." I stood there with my shirt hanging open, the torn fabric folded back against my chest, and watched my son explain me to strangers. There are moments in a parent's life that redefine everything that came before, not because they reveal something new, but because they confirm something you had been hoping was wrong. This was one of those moments, and it hurt with the specific, precise quality of things that have been a long time in arriving. The office door opened. Leonard came back through the service entrance. He was carrying a large brown folder, the kind with a tie closure, and he walked without any change in his pace or his expression to the VIP table and set it down in front of Aaron and Tessa. He didn't open it. He didn't explain it. He placed both hands flat on the table, one on either side of the folder, looked at my son and said, "Whenever you're ready." Aaron stared at the folder, the way a person stares at something they had rather not touch. Tessa reached over and untied the cord herself. The documents inside were organized the way Leonard organizes everything cleanly, precisely in the sequence they would be needed. On top was a copy of the property deed filed with the Houston County Recorder's Office. The legal description of the property ran to 2 pages. What happens next changed something in me that I don't think I've ever fully put into words, because what I was about to learn about what my own son had allowed to go on right under my roof in my name was the kind of thing that makes a man question every moment he looked the other way. Here's what I want to ask you, while you still don't know how it ends. If someone you loved had been quietly building a lie around your life, would you rather have known sooner? Or do you believe some truths only land when the time is right? At the top of the first page in the section marked Grantee, the name read Walter R. Crenshaw. Below that was the LLC Certificate of Organization for Crenshaw and Coburn Restaurant Group, issued by the California Secretary of State. Same name in the registered agent field. Below that, a laminated card, the kind issued by a corporate attorney, that read Chairman Board of Directors, with a photograph and a signature and a notary seal pressed into the corner. The photograph was of me. The signature was mine. Leonard straightened up and looked at my son, Mr. Aaron Crenshaw. He spoke with the careful neutrality of a man delivering a verdict he has waited a long time to deliver. "This is the owner of the building you told your girlfriend that you own." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room all evening. Aaron's face moved through several expressions in quick succession, none of them ones I'd ever seen on him before. His mouth came open. His eyes traveled from the documents to Leonard to me, and back again to the documents. His hand drifted up and touched his jaw, the reflexive way a person presses a bruise to confirm it hasn't healed. Tessa had gone perfectly still. She was studying the photograph on the chairman card, then my face, then the photograph again. Her lips had pressed flat, and the color in her cheeks had shifted from the flush of anger to something closer to the gray of understanding. "This is a mistake," Aaron said. The volume had nearly left his voice. "There's been some kind of mistake." "There is no mistake," Leonard said. "My father is Walter Crenshaw. I'm telling you, this man is not—" He stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since he had told me to move out of his way in the entryway. I watched him search my face for a way out, for the angle that would make it untrue, and I watched him come up empty. I pulled a chair from the nearest unoccupied table and sat down. Not at his table. At the table beside it, the one set for two, with nobody in it, the candle burning low between the empty glasses. I sat because my feet ached, and because I was 60 years old, and my shirt was torn open, and I had been on my feet a long time. "Sit down, Aaron," I said. "We're not done." He sat, not because I told him to, because his legs demanded it. Tessa closed the folder. She did not push it back across the table. She kept both hands flat on top of it, as though she was holding it in place, as though it might otherwise lift off and become something beyond managing. "How long?" she said quietly. Not to me, not to Leonard, but to Aaron, in the voice of someone who already knows the answer and is asking only to hear it said aloud. "How long have you been lying to me?" Aaron said nothing. His hands lay in his lap, and he was staring at the tablecloth, and his shoulders had dropped too, in from where they'd been when he stood up to challenge Leonard too, in that we're not coming back tonight. I had nothing to add to what the documents had already made plain. I let the room carry it. I had not planned to say anything more. The documents had done what documents do: established facts, sealed exits, eliminated the possibility of convenient misunderstanding. My intention had been to let Leonard manage the rest of the evening while I found somewhere quiet to work out what came next. But Tessa was still sitting there, hands flat on the folder, her question suspended in the air between her and Aaron, with no answer arriving, and I found I had something to add after all. "The penthouse," I said. Aaron's head came up. "The penthouse in the Woodlands that you told Tessa you own." I kept my voice level. Not cold, just accurate. "It's a studio apartment in Midtown Houston, 850 square feet. The rent is $1,200 a month." Tessa turned to look at me. Her face was very still. "The last 3 months," I continued. "I paid his landlord directly. His card was declined in July, and he called me, and I covered it. August the same, September. I sent it before he even had to ask, because I could see it coming. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. I opened the Venmo app and turned the screen toward the table. 3 transactions, $1, $200 each, with the same note in the memo field every time. The note read, "Rent don't tell anyone." He had asked me to keep it between us. I had until now. Tessa looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Aaron. He was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles pressing white against the linen, staring at a point on the tablecloth, roughly 6 in front of him. His jaw was working in that same way again, the way it had worked when he was deciding what kind of person to be, while I stood there with my shirt torn open. He had made the wrong choice then, and I did not know what choice he was making now. "The car as well," I said. "The Porsche outside the black 911 in the reserved spot. He showed it to you before you came up, I imagine." Tessa exhaled slowly and at length, not a sigh, the sound of a structure settling under its own weight. "He pointed at it," she said. Her voice was flat and measured the voice of someone stepping carefully across uncertain ground. "He said it was his. He used those exact words. He said it's mine. And he said he keeps it here because he owns the building." "May I keep it here?" I said. "Because I own the building." Aaron pushed back from the table and got to his feet. His chair scraped across the marble, and the sound cut through the room. "I need some air," he said to no one, to the room, to himself. "Sit down, Aaron." He sat down. He pressed both palms over his eyes and held them there, and his shoulders were trembling slightly, the fine tremor of a man holding in something that is working hard to come out. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Across the room, I could see Calvin Hester, with his notebook open, pen moving. Nadia was positioned near the service station, not bothering to pretend she was doing anything else, just watching, with the focused attention of someone who understands that what is unfolding here matters. I was not finished. There was still more to say. I waited to see if Aaron would lower his hands. Aaron lowered his hands. His eyes were dry, but red at the rims, the look of a man who had come very close to the edge and stepped back from it. He stared down at the table. He did not look at Tessa, and Tessa did not look at him, and the space between them had taken on a quality that had not existed at the start of the evening, a distance that had nothing to do with inches. The kitchen door swung open. Ignacio Fuentes came through it, still in his apron, a long white canvas apron stained at the hip, with something dark reduced stock probably, or the black truffle sauce that had been running on the line all evening. He was 52 years old and built the way a man gets after 3 decades on his feet in hot rooms, broad through the shoulders, deliberate in every movement. He stopped at the edge of the VIP section, took in the table, then looked at me. Leonard had texted him. Ignacio had come. That was all that needed to happen, the Wagyu ribeye. Ignacio said without preamble in the direct manner he has always spoken with the black truffle reduction and the bone marrow butter finish. You ordered it tonight. Aaron looked up. He said nothing. Mr. Crenshaw and I developed that dish in the winter of 2016. We ran 42 versions over 6 weeks before we settled on the final preparation. Ignacio's voice carried across the section, without any effort the voice of a man used to making himself heard above the noise of a working kitchen. He drove down from New York twice during that period specifically to taste test. He has strong opinions about truffle ratios. I did, and I still do. The dish received a James Beard Award nomination the following year as part of our overall menu submission. It is the most ordered item on our menu and has been for 4 consecutive years. Ignacio looked at the plate in front of Aaron. The Wagyu ribeye sat largely untouched, cut into 2 pieces, the rest going cold in its own sauce. Aaron had eaten perhaps a third of it before the evening had turned in its current direction. Earlier, before the incident with the dress, I had heard him tell Tessa it was honestly not worth the price. Ignacio regarded the plate for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he looked at Aaron and said, "Your father approved this recipe." Every recipe on this menu carries his stamp of approval. He walks through that kitchen door without warning, works his way down the line, tasting as he goes, and gives me an honest account of whatever still falls short. A pause in what he was saying. The honesty never wavers. He worked the strings of his apron loose, folded the cloth into a neat square, and placed it along the rim of the service cart. Then he pushed back through the kitchen door and was gone. I stood there and watched until he disappeared. It had been Iris who settled the question of which version to keep. Late on a Thursday evening, Ignacio and I, 2 of the line cooks, we'd been running tests, and Iris was perched at the pass with a glass of white wine, evaluating each plate as it came to her, with the kind of clear-eyed, unsentimental precision she brought to everything she weighed in on. The 42nd came out and she put her fork down and said, "That's the one," then lifted her wine glass and returned to her thoughts. End of discussion. I hadn't revisited that night in quite a while. I revisited it now. Ignacio and I had shared a kitchen for 8 years by the time Iris died. In the 12 months that followed, he was among perhaps 4 people who understood the particular kind of care that grief calls for, the kind that most people, meaning no harm at all, simply cannot locate in themselves. He never once asked how I was holding up. No flowers arrived, no casseroles. None of those earnest messages that stack up in the weeks after a loss and sit there demanding replies you have no reserves left to write. His approach was different. Every Tuesday for 6 months after Iris's funeral, a text arrived from him at 7 in the morning. 1 line, nothing more. A supplier he was weighing. A new technique he'd been putting through its paces. A walk-in cooler issue he'd already resolved but wanted me aware of. No reply needed. Each message was simply proof the restaurant was breathing. What we'd built was still intact, the world hadn't stopped, and there would be a seat in it for me when I found my way back. I found my way back in the 7th month. I walked through the kitchen door on a Wednesday afternoon, and Ignacio glanced up from the station where he was working through a halibut and said the truffle order came in short again. "I've been meaning to call," and I said, "I'll handle it," and that closed it. Iris had been fond of Ignacio. She possessed the rare good sense to appreciate people who were precisely what they seemed, and Ignacio was precisely that, a man of serious intent who showed how much he cared not through any outward display, but through the steadiness of his work, the same standard met day after day. She'd said to me once in those early months after we opened that, watching him at the stove put her in mind of a surgeon at the top of his field. The assurance was so deep, it no longer needed to announce itself. He wept at her funeral. I spotted him from across the room, standing near the back alongside Leonard, and he made no move to contain it or redirect it, which I found in the peculiar ledger that grief keeps strangely steadying. Certain losses are vast enough to need someone standing witness, and Ignacio had stood witness for me. The dish itself, the 42nd iteration, the one Iris had blessed on a Thursday evening in a kitchen, fragrant with thyme and long-reduced stock, had held its place on the menu without a break for 7 years. Ignacio had lobbied to retire it twice, arguing both times that a dish elevated to signature status can start to function as a crutch, that a menu has to keep moving to stay truthful. Both times I told him to leave it. Not purely out of sentiment, though. Sentiment was in the mix because it was still the finest thing we put on a plate, and some things, once they've arrived at exactly right, have no business being turned into something else. Aaron had declared it not worth the price. I sat looking at the plate in front of my son, turning over in my mind all 41 versions that hadn't made the cut, the one that had, and the woman whose judgment had separated them. I decided the plate was going to remain right where it sat until the evening was done. Across the table, Tessa's phone vibrated against the cloth. She glanced down, and something moved across her face, a different kind of movement, unconnected to Aaron, or the folder, or the Venmo records. She flipped the phone face down. Then she turned it back over and read the screen again. "What is it?" Aaron said. She gave him nothing. Her eyes stayed fixed on whatever was there, and the color was leaving her face in slow, steady increments. She rotated the phone and extended it across the table toward him. He took it and looked. The blood left his face in a single clean motion, the way water drains from a sink when the plug is pulled. The clip was 52 seconds long. It had gone up on TikTok 22 minutes earlier, posted by a woman who had been seated 3 tables from the VIP section throughout the evening. The caption, "This just happened at an uptown Houston restaurant, and I cannot believe what I'm seeing." In the first 20 minutes, it had been viewed more than 70,000 times. By the point Nadia brought it to my attention later that night, the figure had cleared 200,000 and was still moving upward. The algorithm had concluded with the focused appetite it brings to public humiliation that this was precisely the material it existed to amplify. The clip withheld nothing. It opened with Tessa's voice already at full pitch, already beyond retrieval, and it captured the grab, the tear, the buttons scattering across the marble. It captured me on my feet with my shirt hanging open. It captured Aaron behind his wine glass. Every second of it, 52 seconds uncut. Aaron passed the phone back and said nothing. His hand trembled enough that Tessa had to reach in and take it from him. He shoved his chair back from the table. "We're leaving, right now. We have to go." "Sit down," I said. "You can't hold us here. You have no right." "I'm not holding anyone." My voice stayed level. "Walk out whenever you like. What you ought to know first is that 2 men have been in the downstairs lobby for the last 15 minutes, and they came in right behind you. They were there when I pulled up. They tailed you inside." Aaron went perfectly still. I'd clocked them on arrival. When I turned into the parking structure, a gray sedan was sitting in a space aimed directly at the entrance engine, dead no movement from either occupant. The stillness of men on a job, not men at rest. I'd registered the car and set it aside the way I do with things that have no immediate use, a mental file marked for later, for when the moment arrives. The moment had arrived. Dad. The word came out stripped bare, emptied of everything he'd been projecting across the table all night. Not a 30-year-old in a rented suit talking, a frightened boy. "Dad, I know what you need," I said. "We'll get there." At the corner table, Calvin Hester shut his notebook, capped his pen, and rose. He moved across the room, without hurry, and came to a stop next to my chair, placing a business card face up on the tablecloth before me. Houston Chronicle Food and Culture. His name beneath the masthead in modest, precise lettering. "I'd like to report this accurately," he said. "If you'd consider speaking with me, sir, at whatever point you're ready." I looked down at the card. I thought about Iris, who had always held more firmly than I ever managed to, that true things belong out in the open, said plainly, where no one can quietly unmake them. I lifted the card and slid it into the breast pocket of my shirt, the ruined shirt. There was an irony in that particular location that wasn't lost on me. "Not tonight," I said. "But yes." Hester gave a single nod and returned to his corner. Nadia materialized at my shoulder with the quiet efficiency she has when something requires attention. "Mr. Crenshaw." She said, her voice pitched low enough to stay between us. Leonard says the two men from downstairs, they've come up. They're standing at the host stand. I turned to look at Aaron. Both hands rested flat on the table. His eyes were shut and his lips moved in the faintest way, the way lips move when someone is counting silently, or praying, or laboring to recall the mechanics of breathing. "All right," I said. I sat up straight in my chair. "Here we go." They came through the dining room, the way people move when they've already decided the room's rules don't apply to them. Two men, both somewhere in their 30s, both in street clothes, dark jeans, collared shirts, the sort of forgettable attire built to draw no attention. The one leading was taller, heavier through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been set wrong after being broken. His name, as I'd find out later, was Brent Colby. Behind him came Gil Tarpley, shorter, faster in how he carried himself, with the watchful readiness of a man whose job was tracking exits. They'd told the host, Stan, they had an appointment with a guest. The host, a 22-year-old who had been working at Crenshaw & Cove for 4 months, had waved them through. It was a Friday evening, the restaurant was running at capacity, and she hadn't had a moment to confirm anything, nor had they given her one. That was how the whole thing was meant to unfold. Brent Colby drew up at the edge of the VIP section. He fixed his eyes on Aaron the way you look at something you've spent time hunting down. Aaron Crenshaw. Not posed as a question, a statement of verification. You've got until end of business tomorrow, 9/400 cash or wire transfer, your call. The table went completely quiet. Aaron got to his feet. His chair scraped back into the table behind him. A water glass lurched, and Tessa caught it without taking her eyes off Aaron. An automatic reached the body memory of someone who had spent years intercepting things at the margins of other people's messes. "This isn't the place for this," Aaron said. His voice was reaching for authority and coming up empty. "We've been outside for 40 minutes, Gil said from behind Brent. "You went dark 3 days ago. This is exactly the place." Aaron turned toward me. He swung his full body around, the way a child pivots to the nearest adult when the thing they feared most has walked through the door. "Dad," he said, "please." I had been waiting for that word all evening, not with any satisfaction, but with the particular weariness of a man who has long known something was on its way, and spent considerable time hoping he'd been wrong about it. I held Aaron's gaze for a moment. Then I looked at Brent Colby. "What's the interest rate on that loan?" I asked. Brent's eyes shifted to me and made their assessment the torn shirt hanging open at the front, the worn shoes, the face of a man past 60. He ran the same calculation most people run and landed on the same mistaken answer. "That's between us and your son," he said. "I'm choosing to make it my concern," I said. "What is the rate?" He said nothing. I reached into my pocket, not for my phone, for my keys. I raised them up where Aaron could see them. "You told her that car was yours," I said. The black Porsche in the reserved spot downstairs. He'd shown it to her before they came up. Aaron's mouth fell open. Nothing followed. I pressed the key fob. 7 floors below, through the building's bones and the elevator shaft and the floor under our feet, no sound reached us. Not the chirp of the alarm, acknowledging the signal, but I knew it had gone off, and Aaron knew it had gone off. The way his face collapsed told me exactly how much of what he'd constructed that evening had been built on that car as a foundation. I passed the keys to Leonard, who had materialized at my shoulder with the precise timing he has always had for moments that need him. "Have it brought around to the garage," I said. "And let's get some assistance up here." Leonard took the keys, regarded Brent Colby and Gil Tarpley with a look that held neither aggression nor doubt, and said quietly, "Gentlemen, I'll need you to stay right where you are." Then he stepped off and made 2 calls. The first went to building security. The second went to 911. Brent Colby had not moved from where Leonard had asked him to stand. Gil Tarpley hadn't moved either. They were a particular category of professional men who understood that the distance between collecting on a debt and crossing into criminal territory was a line that a room full of witnesses and a 911 call made very sharp and very visible. They waited. So did the rest of the dining room. Aaron came around the table and positioned himself directly in front of me, close enough that I could make out the fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there the last time I'd studied his face with any care. The lines that accumulate from too little sleep and too many bad calls and the grinding effort of sustaining a version of yourself that has no real foundation. "Dad!" His voice broke on the word actually fractured the way a voice does when the thing that's been holding it together finally gives way. "Dad, they'll hurt me if I don't pay. You don't know what these people are like. Please, I'm asking you, please." His hands came up and wrapped around my forearms. His fingers were trembling. There is a version of this moment where I pull out my phone, open my banking app wire 9 to 400, and watch the two men walk out, where I tell myself I did it to keep my son safe from physical harm, and I hold on to that explanation long enough to get through the rest of the night. I've replayed that version in my mind many times since that Friday. I know precisely where it goes. Brent Colby and Gil Tarpley leave. Aaron breathes again. Tessa is still seated, still absorbing everything, but the immediate threat has dissolved. And Aaron looks at me with the expression of someone hauled back from the deep end. And behind the relief, I can already see forming the assumption. The assumption that this is simply the arrangement, that there exists some threshold beneath which I will always step in, a floor that holds regardless of what he does or what it costs. I would have driven home that night $9,400 lighter, having taught him that lesson one more time. I've been teaching him that lesson since he was 22. I've been paying for it in various forms, money obviously, but also the tolerance of conduct I should never have tolerated, the silence I held, when speaking was what was called, for the 10,000 small concessions I made in the name of preserving a relationship that on my end had long been held together almost entirely by those concessions. Iris wouldn't have done it this way. She was more direct than I ever managed to be, in the particular manner of someone who never confused directness with cruelty and grasped that honesty offered with love is its own form of dignity. She would have had this conversation with Aaron years ago in some kitchen or parking lot or phone call. I had found a reason to avoid because I convinced myself the timing was off, or he wasn't in the right place to hear it, or I couldn't risk pushing him further away. The timing is never right. A person is never simply ready. You have the conversation because it has to be had, not because it's easy. I thought about the boy at the window in Queens breathing fog onto the glass, watching for me to come back from a job site. I thought about what that boy was owed by his father. Not money, not rescue. The thing he'd actually been standing at that window, waiting for a version of me who showed up and stayed and was honest and didn't leave the hard things in a pile marked for later. Later had found us. It was standing in my restaurant with its shirt torn open and its buttons scattered across the floor. I looked at my son's face. 30 years of it. The boy at the window in Queens, the teenager who had his mother's eyes and his father's obstinacy, and who had spent most of his life pointing that obstinacy in the wrong directions. The young man who'd stopped calling unless he needed something, and who had kept calling because I kept picking up. I had covered the apartment. I had covered the phone bill. I had transferred money for groceries, car insurance, a dental bill, 3 months of rent. And each time I'd told myself it was a temporary measure, that something was about to shift, that the next conversation would be the one where things actually changed. This was the next conversation. I covered his hands with mine and held them for a moment, brief enough that most of the room likely missed it. Then I stepped back and released them. "I've paid for your apartment," I said. "Your phone, your groceries. I covered 3 months of your rent while you were telling a woman you just met that you owned a building in uptown Houston." My voice stayed low. "This was between us. I won't be paying for your lies, Aaron, not this time." His face gave way, not with any drama, quietly the way a face gives way when the final door swings shut. "They could—" "No," I said, "they can't, because what they're doing right now is against the law." I turned toward Brent Colby. "Quickline Lending out of Pasadena. I looked you up while Leonard was making his calls. You're running consumer loans in California without a license under the California financing law. The interest rate on my son's loan is approximately 180% annually." I let that land for a moment. The California financing law, amended by Assembly Bill 539 in January of 2019, caps the rate on personal loans under $10,000 at 36%. Your contract with my son is unenforceable, possibly void. Brent's jaw went tight. "The police are on their way," I said. "I'd recommend staying put." I turned back to Aaron. His arms had dropped to his sides. His eyes were wet, and he was drawing breath in. That slow, careful way of someone working hard to stay on his feet. "I'm going to get you a lawyer," I said quietly. "A proper one. He'll deal with these people through the appropriate channels. But you are going to have to face what you did to land yourself here. All of it. Do you understand me?" He nodded, one small motion, the smallest one he'd made all evening, and the most honest. I hadn't exactly forgotten Tessa was still in the room. I'd set her at the edge of my attention, the way you set aside something you mean to come back to. The exchange with Aaron and the matter of Brent Colby had pulled everything to the center. She had remained at the perimeter of the VIP section, through the whole of it, her clutch in both hands, the torn hem of her rented dress trailing behind her across the marble. She had heard everything. She came toward Aaron slowly, the dress whispered against the floor. Aaron heard her approach and turned, and something in his expression opened up with a hope that was hard to witness, the reflexive, irrational hope of a person in a burning building who hears footsteps on the stairs. She stopped in front of him. 4 months, she said. Her voice had the steadiness that comes not from calm, but from having exhausted every other option. 4 months. I believed I knew who you were. Aaron started to speak. Don't, she said. Not in anger. Something on the far side of anger. I'm not asking for an explanation. There's nothing you could say that would turn this into something other than what it is. She looked at him for a long, still moment. The borrowed suit, the replica watch, the face of a man who had spent 4 months performing someone he wasn't. Then she gathered the train of her dress in one hand, stepped past him, and walked toward the elevator without looking back. She passed within 2 feet of where I was standing, and stopped. I hadn't expected that. She stood with her back to Aaron, her face turned slightly toward the floor, and she took one breath. Then she looked up at me. Her mascara had tracked down her left cheek in a single dark line. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were red but dry. I'm sorry, she said, for your shirt, for all of it. I had no right. I looked at this 27-year-old woman in a borrowed dress she couldn't afford, in a restaurant she'd arrived at on the arm of a fabrication. I thought about what people reach for when they're frightened, and what they do when they discover the ground under them was never solid to begin with. I know, I said. Go home, Tessa. She gave one nod. Then she crossed to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited with her shoulders squared until the doors parted and she stepped through and they closed behind her. The room let out a breath. Nadia was at my side again, as she had been at intervals across the evening, appearing and then receding with the quiet effectiveness of someone who knows that the best assistance is the kind that doesn't announce itself. She was holding the dark wool jacket the restaurant keeps behind the host's stand for guests who get cold near the windows. She extended it toward me without a word. I looked at her. This young woman working 3 shifts a week to stay in school, who had tried to step between Tessa and me at the start of this, and had been shoved aside for the effort. I took the jacket and pulled it on over the torn shirt. Thank you, Nadia, I said, her chin lifted slightly. Of course, Mr. Crenshaw. Behind me, Aaron hadn't moved. I could hear him breathing slow and deliberate, the breathing of a man figuring out how to stand in a room after everything holding it up has fallen away. The elevator indicator above the doors was working its way down. Floor 6, floor 5. From somewhere below, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a siren. Officer Renee Braddock arrived at 9:34 with a partner whose name I never caught, a younger man who positioned himself near the elevator and did not speak for the duration. She was around 40, compact and efficient in how she moved, with the bearing of someone who had walked into enough troubled rooms to have left surprise well behind her. She took in the dining room in one steady sweep, the documents still on the table, Brent Colby and Gil Tarpley standing by the window, Aaron alone at the VIP table, Leonard waiting near the service entrance. The remaining guests who hadn't left and were working very hard to look as though they hadn't stayed purely to see how it ended. She looked at me last. Her gaze moved to my torn shirt beneath the open jacket, then back to my face, and something shifted briefly in her expression. A flicker of recognition gone, almost immediately behind the professional manner. She'd seen the clip. Neither of us needed to say so. Sir, she said, can you tell me what happened here tonight? I told her, short and factual, the way I tell most things. Leonard provided the security camera footage on a tablet. California law permits a business owner to share security recordings with law enforcement without a court order when officers are on the premises and actively investigating an incident. Officer Braddock reviewed the relevant portions, asked 3 questions, and made notes. Then she turned to Brent Colby. What Brent Colby and Gil Tarpley had done by coming to Crenshaw and Cobier's that evening and publicly demanding payment from Aaron while making implicit reference to consequences constituted criminal threats under California Penal Code, Section 519, which prohibits using fear of injury to compel the payment of money. Additionally, Quickline Lending's operation of consumer lending in California without a license under the California financing law exposed the company to regulatory action and rendered their loan agreements with California borrowers potentially unenforceable. Officer Braddock conveyed this to Brent Colby in the same tone she'd used with me, measured factual, the register of someone who finds the law sufficient on its own and sees no need to embellish it. Brent Colby said nothing. Gil Tarpley studied the floor. They were escorted to the elevator. Aaron had been asked to give contact information and a brief statement as a witness, not a defendant, because the party in violation of California lending law was Quicklime. Lending, not the borrower. That distinction mattered, and Officer Braddock drew it plainly, which I was grateful for. After Brent and Gil had gone and the statements were finished, she paused beside me on her way out. "You handled this well, sir," she said. I turned that over in my mind. I thought about the 52-second clip and the torn shirt and Aaron's hands trembling against my forearms and the moment I had stepped back and let go. "I had good help," I said. I looked toward Leonard, who was talking quietly with the remaining kitchen staff near the service door. Officer Braddock followed my gaze and gave one nod. Then she and her partner were gone, the elevator doors closed, and the dining room settled into a quiet, deeper than any it had held all evening. Nadia began resetting the nearest tables. The music returned low and tentative, as though the sound system wasn't quite sure the room was prepared to receive it. I walked to where Aaron was sitting. He didn't look up when I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. His hands were in his lap. The wine glass in front of him was still sitting half full, untouched for the better part of an hour. The Wagyu ribeye had been cleared at some point, without either of us registering it. I sat across from my son in the restaurant that bore my name above the door, and I gave him the time he needed to find his words. He made me wait 11 minutes. I know because I had my eyes on the clock mounted above the bar, the one in a brass frame that Iris had chosen from a shop in the Heights the week before we opened. 11 minutes of Aaron staring at the tablecloth, while Nadia moved through the room in near silence, and Leonard held his post near the service entrance, and the last two remaining tables of guests finally concluded that the evening had offered them all it was going to, and gathered themselves and left. At 11 minutes and some seconds, Aaron looked up. "I don't know why I did it," he said. His voice was rough, but not from crying. He hadn't cried. Not fully, not the release I'd half anticipated. He'd been holding it in, which does its own particular kind of damage. "I think you do," I said. He looked at me. "She asked me early on what I did for work. I told her I was in real estate development, and she looked at me differently just for a second." He stopped. His hand moved to the base of the wine glass without lifting it, just resting there, something to hold on to. I liked the way she looked at me, so I kept it going because I liked it and because I believed I could manage it and because I've never been good at stopping things once they're in motion. "No," I said. "You haven't." He flinched slightly at that. I hadn't said it to wound him. I'd said it because it was accurate, and we were well past the point where accuracy needed to be cushioned. "I just wanted her to see me differently," he said. "You wanted her to see someone who doesn't exist." The words arrived and stayed. I watched them settle. He didn't push back against them, which told me something I had needed to know for a long time. "She's not wrong to leave," he said after a moment. "No," I said. "She's not." We let that sit between us for a while. Nadia finished the last of the resetting and came to the edge of the section and glanced at Leonard, and Leonard gave a small shake of his head, and she nodded and slipped through the kitchen door. The music played at a volume that was technically present and practically absent. "I've been lying to everyone," Aaron said. "Not just Tessa, everyone, for a long time." A pause. "I know. You paid my rent." He said it the way someone says something in confession, as though speaking it aloud made it real, in a way that the Venmo records spread across the table had not managed to. "You paid it, and you said nothing to anyone, and I just let it happen." "Yes," I said. "And that was my failure as much as yours. A man who keeps catching his son before he hits the ground isn't teaching his son how to land." Aaron's jaw worked. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said. "I'm going to go home. You're going to go back to Midtown Houston, and on Monday I'm going to come and see you, and we're going to talk about what comes next. Not tonight. Tonight has been enough." I pushed my chair back and stood. "Dad," I stopped. "I'm sorry." His voice broke on the final word, the fracture that had been waiting all evening to give way. "I'm sorry for all of it. For tonight. For the last few years. For—" he stopped, swallowed. "For not being someone you didn't have to worry about." I stood at the edge of the table and looked at my son's face and thought about Iris, who had worried about him too in her own way. in the particular manner of a mother who reads the outline of a person's character before anyone else has thought to look and goes on, loving them and hoping. "I know," I said. "Get some sleep." I crossed to the elevator. Leonard fell into step beside me. "You did everything right tonight?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I've been waiting 12 years to say your name out loud in front of someone like that." The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. I did not read the article the morning it ran. I knew it was there. Calvin Hester had sent a message to the number on my card. I had given him a card before leaving the building that night, an old one from the inside pocket of the jacket Leonard keeps in the office for me, saying the piece would run Monday morning, that he had tried to be accurate and fair, and that he hoped I would feel the same when I read it. I read it Monday afternoon alone in the office on the second floor of the River Oaks house with a cup of coffee that had gone cold without my noticing. The piece ran 4 columns wide and above the fold in the culture section. The headline, "The Man in the Flannel Shirt, A Night at Crenshaw & Co., That No One Will Forget." Hester had not used my name. He had not used Aaron's or Tessa's. He had set down what he witnessed with the precision of someone who has spent 20 years being compensated for paying attention. And he had let the facts carry the weight without putting a thumb on the scale. The final paragraph read, "Wealth does not always announce itself, but it always recognizes itself." And on a Friday evening in uptown Houston, in a room full of people who had confused the two, one man in a worn flannel shirt was the only person present who already knew the difference. I set the paper down and looked out the window at the garden. Iris had planted the rosemary along the south wall herself, the spring before she got sick on her knees in the soil-wearing gardening gloves that were too large for her hands. I picked up my phone and called Aaron. He picked up on the first ring. "I read it," he said before I could speak. "So did I." A silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the first one we had managed in longer than I could name. "I'm going to come and see you today," I said. "This afternoon? Is that all right?" "Yes," he said, immediately, no pause. I stopped at Crenshaw & Co. on the way. Nadia was setting up for the lunch service when I came through the door. She saw me and straightened and said good morning. I said good morning. Then I asked her to sit down for a moment, which she did with the careful attention of someone who has learned that when the person whose name is on the lease asks you to sit, it is worth listening to what follows. I took an envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. "The Iris Crenshaw Scholarship for Working Students," I said. "My wife established it the year before she passed. It covers tuition and books for 2 semesters at any accredited California university, renewable once." I looked at her. "You tried to do the right thing Friday night. You tried twice. I saw both times." Nadia looked at the envelope, her hands flat on the table pressed down slightly as though she needed the solidity of the surface beneath them. "Mr. Crenshaw," she said. Her voice had gone careful and quiet. "I can't." "Iris would have wanted you to finish school," I said. "She had firm views about young people who work hard and show up. You are exactly the kind of person she had in mind when she created this." Nadia looked up at me. Her eyes were bright, and her chin was doing what chins do when someone is working very hard to keep their expression composed. "Thank you?" she said. The 2 words came out smaller than she'd intended, and truer. "Thank you for the jacket," I said. "On Friday." I left her there with the envelope and the lunch service and the rest of her day ahead of her. Then I got back in the car and headed toward Midtown Houston. Midtown Houston on a Monday afternoon has its own specific tempo. Delivery trucks sitting double parked on the side streets, dry cleaners and phone repair shops and lunch counters with handwritten menus taped inside the glass. The kind of neighborhood that doesn't ask what you're doing there and doesn't much care either way. I had driven through it 100 times without stopping. I had never had a reason to stop before. Aaron's building sat on Elgin Street, 4 floors of pale yellow stucco, a metal security gate out front, and a call box with 3 buttons that no longer worked. His unit was on the 2nd floor. I took the stairs. I had 2 things with me, a garment bag draped over one arm with the Crenshaw & Co. Busboy uniform, inside it, black trousers, white shirt, the small enamel pin bearing the restaurant's name that every front-of-house staff member wears on their left lapel, and an envelope tucked into my jacket pocket, the same kind I had used for Nadia's scholarship, carrying a letter from my attorney. Aaron opened the door before I knocked. He had been tracking the sound of footsteps on the stairs. He looked like a man who had gone 3 days without proper sleep, which was the truth. The apartment behind him was small and honest in the way those places are. A window looking out onto the building's interior courtyard, a kitchen counter with 2 stools, a bed visible through a doorway that had no door. On the table near the entrance sat the witness statement paperwork from Friday night, and next to it a legal pad covered in handwriting I couldn't make out from where I stood. I stepped inside. He moved back to make room. I draped the garment bag over the back of one of the kitchen stools and set the envelope down on the table beside the legal pad. "The letter is from my attorney," I said. I told him that Quickline Lending had been running consumer loans in California without a California financing law license. The interest rate on his loan exceeded the legal ceiling by a factor of 5. My attorney's position was that the loan agreement was unenforceable and very likely void under California law. He would file the appropriate motions that week. Aaron looked at the envelope. He didn't reach for it. "And the other thing," he said. "The uniform," I said. "6 months full-time, you start as a busboy, same as every other new hire. Leonard will supervise you directly. You'll rotate through every station in the front of house before it's over." I paused. "My attorney has also put together a standard employment contract, full California Labor Code compliance, $16.50 an hour, which is the state minimum wage. You won't be paid more because you're my son, and you won't be paid less for the same reason." Aaron's throat moved. He looked at the garment bag. "What if I'm bad at it?" he asked. "Then you'll get better," I said. "That's what the 6 months is for." He nodded. His hand moved to the garment bag and touched the zipper without pulling it open. "Your mother wanted you to have everything," I said. "I tried to give you everything. I was wrong." Not about wanting it for him, about what everything means. The courtyard beyond the window was quiet. Somewhere deeper in the building, a television was running, the sound of it coming through the walls like something half-remembered. Aaron's chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders rose once and settled. When he raised his head, his eyes were wet, but his voice held. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I know I keep saying it." "You can keep saying it," I told him. "Just make sure you're doing something different alongside it." I moved toward the door. "Dad," his voice snagged. "She planted rosemary mom in the garden. I remember watching her do it." I stopped with my hand on the doorframe. "I know," I said. "She did it the spring before she got sick. She said, 'Rosemary is for remembrance.'" I looked back at him once. "Put on the uniform Monday morning." Then I walked down the stairs out through the security gate, got into the Porsche, and sat for a moment in the afternoon light before I turned the key. I didn't go inside on Monday. That was a choice I had made the night before, sitting in the kitchen of the River Oaks house with a glass of water, and the particular quiet that follows after something large has moved through. Aaron didn't need me standing in the doorway of Crenshaw & Co. on his first morning. He needed to walk through that door himself and discover what was on the other side, without his father 10 feet back watching. So, I parked in this structure at ground level and positioned myself near the exit ramp where I had a line of sight to the entrance of the elevator bank. But not much beyond that, and I waited. 7:02 in the morning. The elevator opened and Aaron stepped out. He was wearing the uniform black trousers pressed to a clean crease white shirt, with the collar buttoned the small Crenshaw & Coedes enamel pin on his left lapel. He had his hair combed back in a way I hadn't seen since his mother's funeral when he was 23 years old, and didn't know how to carry grief and had compensated by being very neat. He stood in the lobby for a moment, adjusting the pin with 2 fingers until it sat straight. Then he pulled his spine upright the way a person does, before stepping into something they've committed to and aren't entirely certain they can handle. He went to the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The doors closed. I leaned against the wall of the parking structure and listened to the cable system engaged somewhere above me. My phone buzzed at 7:15. A text from Leonard, 2 words, "He's here." I typed back good. Nadia told me later what had happened on the 3rd floor that morning. I hadn't asked her to report back, but she was the kind of person who understood which information mattered to people without needing to be told a quality I have always valued and almost never found. She said Aaron arrived 3 minutes early. He stood outside the elevator on the 3rd floor for roughly 30 seconds before the doors opened. She knew because she'd been watching through the window of the service station and had seen the elevator indicator lights stop at 3 and hold there. When he came through the doors, he had the uniform on, correctly collar button pinned straight, and he was carrying a small notebook in his left hand, a plain spiral-bound one, the kind you pick up at a drugstore for $2. He had written something on the first page. She didn't see what. Leonard met him at the host stand and walked him through the station assignment and a brief rundown of the morning's setup routine. Aaron listened without cutting in, which Nadia said she hadn't entirely expected. He asked two questions, and both were practical. Where does the linen come from? And what's the procedure when a guest arrives before the table is ready? Leonard answered both and said, "Follow Nadia." And Aaron followed Nadia. She showed him how to set a cover, the specific sequence placemat, then charger, then the napkin folded to the house. Standard silverware, outside in glassware, at the 2:0 position above the knife. She demonstrated once. He watched. She demonstrated again. He watched again. Then he set the next cover himself, moving through each piece with the focused care of someone doing a simple thing and choosing to do it well. It wasn't perfect. The salad fork sat a 1/4 inch too far from the dinner fork, and the napkin fold gave way slightly at the base. Nadia corrected both without a word, the way a good teacher corrects by showing the right way rather than naming the wrong way, so that the students' hands learn the lesson rather than their pride. Aaron reset the cover. This time, it was right. He set 41 more covers that morning. By the 38th, he had stopped thinking through the sequence. By the 41st, the placement was clean, consistent, and moving at the pace the service required. Nadia said he didn't complain. Once didn't check his phone, didn't ask how much time was left in the shift. At 10:15 during the break before the lunch setup, he sat at the service station with his notebook open and wrote something for about 4 minutes. She didn't read it. She didn't ask about it, but she noticed that when he closed it, he held the notebook for a moment in both hands before sliding it into his apron pocket. I thought about the baseball notebooks from the Mets games, the symbols he had invented that I had never been able to decode. Maybe he had always been this person underneath everything. Maybe the notebook had always been there, and I had just been paying for too many other things to see it. I stood there a while longer than I needed to. The morning light was coming in, flat and white through the mouth of the structure. That particular quality of October light in Houston that makes everything look like it's being seen for the first time. A delivery truck pulled up to the service entrance. A woman in running clothes came past on the sidewalk, coffee in one hand, a dog leash in the other. Ordinary things. The city going about its ordinary business, while extraordinary things happened quietly inside it. I found myself thinking about Iris, not about her dying, which is where my mind usually goes when she comes to me. I was thinking about her living. The winter of 2016, the two of us standing at the kitchen pass in the empty restaurant after everyone else had cleared out, tasting the 42nd version of the Wagyu dish with a small fork. Her head tilted slightly to the left, the way it always did when something had her full attention. "That's the one, Walter," she'd said. "That's the one." She had been right about that. She had been right about most things, including, I suspected, the things she had turned over quietly in her mind and never said aloud, because she understood I needed to arrive at them myself. I got into the Porsche. The engine caught with that low, settled sound of something well-built doing exactly what it was made for. I eased out of the space and rolled toward the exit ramp, then out onto Westheimer Road, heading west into the morning, 4 flannel shirts still hanging in the closet, one of them still in its original packaging tag on fold lines still crisp. She had wrapped each one herself in tissue paper and tucked a small card inside, and I had kept every card in the top drawer of the dresser unread since the week she died. I had been holding that last one in reserve. I thought perhaps the time for it had come. The city slid past the windows, and the light was very clear. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know this wasn't just a story about a dinner gone wrong or a young man caught in a lie. This was about 30 years of a father choosing the easier road and what it finally cost both of us to find the harder one. I believe God doesn't let those moments of reckoning come without a reason. The night Tessa ripped that shirt in front of a full dining room, I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me. Looking back, it was the first honest thing that had happened between my son and me in a very long time. It cost me my dignity in public. It cost Aaron his comfortable story. And, in a strange way, it gave us both something we hadn't had in years, a place to start from that was actually true. If these grandpa revenge stories or father stories have taught me anything worth passing on, let me offer it plainly. Don't confuse giving with helping. Handing someone everything they ask for is not love, it's avoidance. When a person shows you who they are under pressure, believe them, and then decide what you're willing to do about it. The hardest boundary you will ever draw is the one you draw for someone you raised. Draw it anyway. Earned respect and given respect are not the same thing. One lasts. If this story moved something in you, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts down in the comments, whatever comes to mind. And if you know someone who needed to hear something in here today, please pass it along to them. If you haven't already, subscribing to Grandpa's Revenge means you won't miss what comes next. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.